disease.
Well, give me Olympia 2-1, would you?
Hey, what's she? Did you notice?
Say, listen, me with a gun on the hip and a kidnapped old lady on my hands, I'm gonna stick around asking questions from a lot of cops.
Kim, she didn't kill us.
How you doing?
Let me out. I can't stand it.
Keep quiet. You're sitting pretty.
What's in there?
Who are you?
What are you doing?
Who is she?
This is Mr. Baldwin, Bruce's mother.
What are you doing?
Shut up.
I won't shut up. You're doing something wrong.
Mother, please.
Take her out of here.
Now, wait a minute, Walter.
Quiet. Louis.
Yes,
Take the lady over to Pollock Mike's.
My name's Louis Peluso.
Lock her up. See if she doesn't talk to
Walter,
anyone
you can't do
along the way.
this.
What'll I tell him?
Tell him it's a case of DT.
Don't worry, Mother. This is only temporary. Walter, let go of me.
Where do you think you're going?
I'm going after Mother, and I'm going to get Bruce out of jail. Walter, why did you have to do this to me?
Get Bruce up.
Cary Grant once remarked that everyone he met kept telling him how he'd led such an interesting life. He'd modestly counteract that claim by suggesting that his life had been nothing more than stomach disturbances and self-concern.
Hello there.
Tell me, why are you so good to me?
Shall I climb up and tell you why?
If this was the case, a documentary on such a subject would not only be hard to digest, but also a pretty introspective affair. As we're about to find out, Cary Grant's life was a lot more interesting and sensational than he wanted his adoring public to believe. Cary Grant had a screen persona that was suave, effortless, cultured, debonair and witty. It was a persona that he fashioned over many years, and one that dominated his entire being. In truth, Cary Grant was not Cary Grant at all. He was a small, emotionally scarred child from the back streets of Bristol, England, always looking for affection, but scared to show his emotions. The child inside Cary Grant surfaced on January the 18th, 1904, at 1 o'clock in the morning, under the name Archibald Alec Leach. He was born in Hughenden Road, inside one of the newly constructed rows of terraced houses that populate Horsefield, which was then a slum area in his home city of Bristol, England. At the time of Cary Grant's birth, the British Empire was the dominant force in the world still, and King Edward VII presided over the throne. The lights of Hollywood were as dim a flicker as the gaslights that barely lit the cobbled streets. Bristol itself is the largest city in the southwest of England. It's historically a county in its own right, occupying a narrow strip along the banks of the River Avon between Somerset and Gloucestershire. It was granted its city status by King Henry VIII in 1542. One of the most famous landmarks is, without doubt, the Clifton Suspension Bridge. The building of the bridge was begun in 1831 with an Egyptian-inspired design that incorporated sphinxes, but the cost was considered too great. As it was, only the piers had been built by 1853, when all building ceased due to crippling financial problems. Eventually, the 702-foot bridge was completed in 1864. The bridge was designed by Isambard Kingdom Brunel, a famous engineer who gave England the Great Western Railway, the first major railway that ran from London to Bristol. He also designed and built Bristol train station, known as the Great Train Shed, and the Great Western Hotel, to house the transatlantic passengers who came to board his great ship called the SS Great Britain. He was a man with a vision, and that vision was definitely great. Sadly, he didn't live to see the completion of the Clifton Suspension Bridge, but he had more success during his lifetime with other projects, such as the redevelopment of the Bristol Docks. One of the redeveloped areas of Bristol Docks, called Millennium Square, plays host to a life-sized bronze statue of Cary Grant. It was unveiled as part of the centenary celebrations of his life by his widow Barbara and his daughter Jennifer. If Brunel was Bristol's first famous son, it's fitting that Cary Grant, Bristol's second and more famous son, is linked to Brunel in this way. One of the many contradicting factors of Cary Grant's early life in Bristol was that when he was born, he was circumcised. This was not, and still isn't, a common procedure in England. There's no record of Jewish ancestry or a reasonable medical explanation why this would have been carried out. In later life, he would donate money to Jewish causes and claim it was because his mother had been Jewish. Some sources claim that Cary Grant was an illegitimate child of a Jewish factory worker called Lillian, who'd enjoyed a brief liaison with Elias Leach, Cary Grant's natural father. It would explain why Elsie Leach, the wife of Elias, never registered Archie's birth until 6 weeks had passed. Nobody will ever know the truth, but it's safe to say that Cary Grant was affected by a sense of not knowing who he was for his entire life. If Elsie Leach was not his birth mother, this may explain her sometimes harsh but always overbearing treatment towards him. 5 years before Archie Leach, in 1899, Elsie Leach gave birth to her first child, John William Elias Leach, who'd barely survived a year before dying of tubercular meningitis. If Archie Leach was the child who replaced her own, it's natural she would resent his presence, but her steely determination for Archie to succeed in whatever he did, and her emotional enveloping of him, may have come from her desire to never go through the pain of losing another child. The intensity of her relationship would form the basis for her son's attitude to women. The control she exacted on young Archie would manifest itself in his own controlling attitude towards his first 4 wives.
I'm going after Mother and I'm going to get Bruce
Archie spent his early years dressed in female clothes, a peculiar practice favoured by Edwardian and Victorian parents. Much later on, he'd confess to wearing ladies' underwear because it was comfortable and easier to wash and dry when he was travelling.
Anything wrong, sir? Yes, everything, Francois.
Let me make you another.
Won't help, it's just me. I'm feeling terrible.
When Archie was 4.5, he was sent to Bishop Road Infant School, not far from the new family home they'd moved into. Elias Leach, being a heavy drinker and forever surrounded by a gaggle of mistresses, had trouble keeping the rent paid on whatever property he was in, and Archie had been uprooted a few times before he made it to school. In his own words, Cary Grant insisted he stayed at school until he was 14 and joined up with the travelling acrobatic troupe when he was 16. In reality, he left school and joined this well-known troupe when he was a mere 6 years old. Elias Leach was a regular visitor to music halls and addicted to the drunken debauchery and backstage antics therein. He befriended Robert and Margaret Lomas, who performed under the stage name of the Penders. Seeing a way to release his wife's grip on his developing son, he offered Archie to this troupe. It was illegal for a child to perform on stage before the age of 10, so this is obviously why, when interviewed, Cary Grant would cover for his father by saying he joined the Pender troupe 10 years later than he actually did. And so Archie left behind the grim realities of Bristol to appear with great success at the Winter Garden Theatre of Varieties in Berlin, Germany, and the equally famous Olympia in Paris, France. Archie celebrated his 7th birthday playing with the Pender Troupe in Jack and the Beanstalk, the Christmas pantomime, at the Theatre Royal, Drury Lane, London, England. In 1911, Archie made his first trip to America, the land that would become the adopted home of Cary Grant, his more famous alter ego. He appeared in a melting pot of world-class acts, in a variety show at the Folies Bergère Theatre in New York. But no sooner had he got the taste for the American way of life, he was sent back to Bristol when the Pender Troupe were an unfortunate casualty of cost-cutting exercises during the show's run. And so Archie returned to the strict regime of Elsie Leach and the far less colourful surroundings of Bishop Road Infant School. The only escape from his drab schooling was to watch Saturday matinees at the various cinemas. In 1912, Elias Leach left his family to take up residence with another woman in Southampton. His parting gift from work colleagues of 20 years standing was an engraved pocket watch. Within 6 months of leaving, due to lack of finances, he'd returned to his home in Bristol to live in an air of bitterness and tension. After Elias Leach died, Cary Grant kept the engraved pocket watch in a safe in his Hollywood home as a memento of his hard-drinking and hard-living father. In 1914, Archie Leach won a scholarship to Fairfield Grade and Secondary School. A plaque marking their most famous pupils' school days was affixed to the school in 1996. He'd often visit there on frequent trips back to Bristol when he was famous and tell the story of how, on returning home from Fairfield one day, he found he couldn't get into his house and was told that his domineering mother, Elsie Leach, had died of a heart attack. Years later, when Archie Leach had become Cary Grant, he was to discover that Elsie Leach hadn't died at all. Elias had committed her to the Fishponds Lunatic Asylum so that he could set up home with a new mistress. The insane cruelty of this action suggests that Elias was the one who should have been committed to a lunatic asylum. Unfortunately, it was quite a common practice for philandering husbands to take such cruel action, and who can guess at how many unwanted wives were conveniently disposed of in this manner. The silent clown, Charlie Chaplin, another famous movie star who hailed from England, had suffered the same dramatic trauma when he came home one day to find his own mother had been admitted to an asylum. In Hannah Chaplin's case, it had been the workhouse authorities who'd sent her to the Cane Hill Lunatic Asylum. In later years, Hannah said that if only someone had given her a cup of tea and let her talk over her troubles, she would have been all right. But the age of psychotherapy was a long way off. Being institutionalized added to her mental frailty, and she never fully recovered. What Elsie Leach must have suffered, knowing that her own husband was responsible for her incarceration, is unimaginable. And if she was sane when she was admitted, the chances of her remaining so over a long period of time were very poor. In 1920, Archie Leach set sail again for America as part of the Pender Troupe. He'd become athletic, agile and strikingly handsome by now, and was treated like a son by Robert Lomas, who ran the troupe. His real father, Elias Leach, had another child to dote on to replace Archie. Eric Leslie Leach was born by his common-law wife, Mabel Bass, the woman he moved in with after Elsie Leach had been committed to the lunatic asylum. The show in which the Pender troupe appeared was called Good Times and ran at the Hippodrome, the biggest theatre in Manhattan. It was a massive success and earned rave reviews and standing ovations. At this time, Archie moved into an apartment with two Australians he'd become friends with, Jack Kelly and Charlie Phelps. Jack Kelly would change his name to George Ori Kelly when he became a famous Broadway costume designer and would later win an Oscar for his creations in Hollywood films. Perhaps some of that style rubbed off on Archie Leach, as when he too changed his name and became Cary Grant, he was always the most well-dressed man in Hollywood. Nobody could wear a suit better than Cary Grant. In 1922, the Pender Troupe of Giants, as they'd become known because of their ability to perform amazing feats of agility on stilts, returned home to London. Archie Leach decided to stay in America, earning a living with a job for the Chamber of Commerce, telling the public about shows that were happening at the Capitol Theatre. He did this whilst walking on 10-foot stilts. Even then, Cary Grant was a cut above the rest.
Now, there's no reason to divide the business between a dozen firms.
Well, of course,
We might be able to manage your entire output.
Oh,
In the meantime, I'll order 100.
100?
Well, I'm sorry, but that's all I can at the moment.
Oh, no, yes.
The usual trade terms.
Look, old man, I wish you'd wait and see Mr. Masters himself. He'll be along in just a minute.
All right, while we're waiting, I'll write the order. The order.
Oh, yes, the order. You know, it's so noisy around here. My order book. Yes, oh, yes, I'll get it.
In 1931, he was spotted playing the part of Carrie Lockwood in a short-lived and ill-conceived Broadway vehicle for Fay Wray, the object of King Kong's desires in the film of the same name, and taken to Hollywood. Under contract to Paramount Studios, he was ordered to change his name. He chose the first name, Carrie, from the character that got him noticed alongside Fay Wray on Broadway, and a Paramount publicist added the surname Grant from a long list of studio-approved suggestions. And so, at 28 years of age, even though Archie Leach lived on inside, Cary Grant was officially born.
The last man who said that to me was Archie Leach just a week before he cut his throat.
Is that so?
We've been in worse jams than this, haven't we, Hildy?
Nope.
Within a few months, Cary Grant met and moved in with another new and handsome star of the silver screen. His name was Randolph Scott. Randy, as he was known to his friends, was primarily interested in money and saw the movie business as a way of making the most money for the least amount of work. Cary Grant, because of his poverty-stricken upbringing, was consumed with the desire to make money too, so it was very much a shared interest. Gossip columnists hinted furiously at something more to their friendship, even though the studio publicists issued a statement explaining the reason for the cohabiting was one of frugality and cost-cutting. In 1933, Cary Grant caught the eye of an actress called Virginia Cherrill, the young star of Charlie Chaplin's classic film City Lights, in which she'd played the blind flower girl. Chaplin, well known for his penchant for young actresses, had been so enraged when she rebuffed his advances that he'd tried to scrap all the footage that he'd shot with her, only to be ordered by his financiers to complete the film with Virginia in the leading role. However, she felt very differently about Cary Grant and immediately fell for his good looks and easy charm. As Cary became romantically involved with Virginia Cherrill, he took her to see his father, who was still living in Bristol with Mabel Bass and their son Eric. Virginia Cherrill recalls that no mention was made of Elsie Leach, Carrie's mother, whom he still believed to have passed away. But his time in England was not a pleasant one, as Carrie's health began rapidly deteriorating. He was forced to see a Harley Street surgeon, who diagnosed a pre-cancerous condition of the rectum. Newspapers were informed that he'd been struck down with influenza, as Carrie was rushed into hospital for an immediate operation and aggressive radium treatments. In this time of turmoil and stress, Cary Grant proposed to Virginia Cherrill. They married on February the 9th, 1934, with Cary still recovering from his serious illness and not in the best of health physically or mentally.
Your heart's quite soft.
Well, what's the matter with me?
Money.
Money? That's not an illness.
Sadly, the marriage wasn't a harmonious union. It ended soon after Cary made a rash suicide attempt with a bottle of whiskey and a handful of sleeping pills. Perhaps it was a cry for help from little Archie Leach, still trapped inside Cary Grant and bearing the scars of an unhappy childhood. Whatever the reason, Virginia sued him for divorce. Cary declined to appear in court, and in under an hour, on March the 26th, 1935, he'd gained his first ex-wife. Like the long line of his glamorous female co-stars, there were more glamorous ex-wives to come.
Yes, I wish you hadn't done that, Hildy.
Done what?
Divorce me. Makes a fellow lose all faith in himself. Almost gives him a feeling he wasn't wanted.
Oh, now look, Junior, that's what divorces are for.
Nonsense. You've got an old-fashioned idea. Divorce is something that lasts forever, till death do us part. Why, divorce doesn't mean anything nowadays, Hildy. Just a few words mumbled over you by a judge. We've got something between us nothing can change.
Well, I suppose you're right in a way, Walt.
Sure, I'm right.
I am fond of you, you know.
And a girl?
I often wish you weren't such a stinker.
Yeah.
Throughout his life, Cary Grant was very close to the multi-millionaire filmmaker, aviator, and later eccentric recluse Howard Hughes. Their relationship started after he was introduced to Cary by Randolph Scott. Howard Hughes was bisexual, but tried to hide it under a blanket of huge promiscuity, his most famous high-profile relationship being Katharine Hepburn, who was herself dogged by rumours of bisexuality because of her independent and dominant personality.
Of doing any such thing.
What in the name of all that's holy am I to do?
Tracy.
Yes, Mike.
Old Parson Parsi, he's never seen Kidbridge before, has he? Now look, I got you into this thing, and I'll get you out of it. Will you marry?
After finishing a Howard Hughes film with Katharine Hepburn called Sylvia Scarlett, Cary Grant returned to England to tend to his ailing father. Elias Leach died of cancer at the age of 62. He'd earned his meagre living at Todd's clothing factory pressing suits. Now his son would earn his not-so-meagre living wearing them. The huge divide between the careers of a father and son could not have been more marked. Cary returned to Hollywood after the funeral to find solace with Randolph Scott, whose father was dying of the same disease. In 1937, Cary made a film that took him in a new direction from the atypical romantic lead. The Awful Truth, co-starring Irene Dunne, was the first of a slew of screwball comedies. It established the physical dexterity learnt during his time with the Bob Pender troupe and the quick-fire repartee that would become Cary's trademark. The film was overseen by Leo McCarey, a young Irish-born director who'd initially become famous working at the Hal Roach Studios, where where his celebrated pairing of Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy kick-started their careers as well as his own. He went on to fashion the Marx Brothers into a comedic and cinematic tour de force too, finding in Carrie the same anarchic streak and physical comedy that set them apart from any other comedians of their day. Outside of filming, Carrie had secretly invested in an influential agency for the stars of Hollywood, with such clients as Greta Garbo, Marlene Dietrich, Douglas Fairbanks Jr. and Rita Hayworth. He effectively became his own agent and a silent partner. This meant he'd receive the 10% agent's fee that was usually taken from him each time he landed a movie role. Carrie's next film was Bringing Up Baby, where, dressed in a pink frilly nightgown, he utters the immortal line, "I think I've gone gay all of a sudden." The first reference to the word gay as a homosexual term in movie history. Carrie's comfortable nature in accepting such roles, as he did with his earlier film Sylvia Scarlett, in which he falls in love with Katharine Hepburn's character, who's continually dressed as a boy, points at either Carrie's own retaliation to the tabloid rumours of the time, or a confidence in himself, where he felt he'd nothing to prove or disprove. In 1938, Cary Grant received a shocking telegram whilst filming the boy's own epic, Gunga Din, which informed him that Elsie Leach, domineering wife of his beloved father, was alive and recently released from the Fish Ponds Lunatic Asylum. At 34 years of age, Cary Grant had to deal with the fact that he'd been lied to by his scheming father, and that the mother that used to scare him was returning to haunt him for real. In 1939, the long and bloody Second World War began, and many expatriates in Hollywood would serve their country. Cary offered to join the Secret Services and formed an elite band with Noel Coward, Ronald Colman, Alexander Korda, Merle Oberon, David Niven, and Douglas Fairbanks Jr. He gave his fee for shooting The Philadelphia Story with Katharine Hepburn and James Stewart to British War Relief and the Red Cross. He'd do the same with another of his big successes, Arsenic and Old Lace. Cary's war work is not very well documented because of its sensitive nature, but it's known that he went on several top-secret missions. Using his cover as a famous film star, he gathered vital information from Hollywood sources. Errol Flynn, for example, was a suspected Nazi sympathiser who was friends with Cary Grant and David Niven. Both could use their friendship with him to aid British intelligence. In 1941, he starred in the first of his Alfred Hitchcock collaborations. Suspicion was a film that exposed a darker side of the Cary Grant character, which was why Hitchcock deliberately chose him for the role. Cary's character was seen through the eyes of his wife as an evil and brooding man, who she thought was trying to kill her. In the end, it turns out to be paranoia, But perhaps Hitchcock saw into the dark depths of Cary Grant, beyond the urbane and witty facade, and connected with the potential of Archie Leach, who was forever cowering inside.
You've got your story right over there on the desk. Go on, smear it all over the front page. Earl Williams captured by the Morning Post. I covered your story for you, and I got in a fine mess doing it. Now I'm getting out. Just what I said.
There are 365 days in a
Alfred
year.
Hitchcock was, like Cary, born in England and moved to America to further his burgeoning career as a director. He would be dubbed the Master of Suspense because of his amazing ability to continue frightening audiences for the majority of his career. Cary and Hitchcock had an immediate bond because of their English roots, their outsider status in Hollywood, and their shared love of the ribald music hall humour of their youth. Both were repressed men. Hitchcock through his strict Catholic faith, and Cary through his mother's dominance over his infancy. But both had varying degrees of light and darkness in their personalities, and the films they made together, that were always deliberately ambiguous. Cary would make several classic films with Hitchcock, including Suspicion, Notorious, To Catch a Thief, and North by Northwest. They'd hoped to film a modern-day version of William Shakespeare's Hamlet because Hitchcock felt that Cary's tortured self would make him the perfect candidate for the role of the tormented Dane. But Cary began to have doubts about the collaboration. Hitchcock felt the reason why Cary declined the role was that he was too close to the subject matter. Alas, poor Cary, he knew him well. On July the 8th, 1942, after a whirlwind romance, Cary Grant married Barbara Hutton, the frail heiress to the $200 million Woolworths fortune. The marriage took place just after Cary Grant legally changed his name from Archibald Leach and became an American citizen. Cary Grant became a real person, if in name only. Again, this marriage wasn't a happy one. With all her wealth, Barbara Hutton suffered bad health and major depression, brought on by long bouts of heavy drinking. Her insecurity regarding her looks and her sense of who she was merited no support from Cary, as he had the very same personality disorders. His only solace was Barbara's son Lance, from a previous marriage to Count Reventlow of Germany. Cary had always wanted children and doted on the boy, becoming a real father to him. Perhaps trying to give Lance what he felt he'd lacked in his own upbringing.
You don't like kids very much, do you?
Oh, I like them all right, except when they're pests.
Again, Cary's secret work as a British spy came into play here, as Count Reventlow was a vital source of Nazi information, which Cary would use to England's advantage. "1943 heralded a picture that was hand-picked by Cary. It was called None But the Lonely Heart and was set in London during the Depression. Cary's character, Ernie Mott, was a mirror image of something Archie Leach might have grown into. He was an anti-hero, cocky, arrogant, brutal, and from the wrong side of the tracks. He was also insecure and riddled with guilt and doubt. The whole film is based around Ernie Mott returning to live in the slums with his dying mother, played by Ethel Barrymore. It wasn't a box office success, but remains a real departure for Cary Grant, the actor. Perhaps gives us an insight into how he viewed his past life and relationship with his own mother. Barbara Hutton and Cary Grant's divorce was finalised in August 1945. In contrast to his lifelong worries about money, he didn't take a penny of her fortune, as he didn't in any of his 4 divorces. In 1947, Cary Grant began dating Betsy Drake, an actress he'd met whilst on a cruise with Merle Oberon. During that year's filming of I Was a Male War Bride, Cary contracted infectious hepatitis. He left the shoot to see a doctor in London and decided to convalesce there. Elsie Leach gave one of her rare interviews to the British press at this time. In it, she said that Archie was always restless, even as a child, and he never liked to feel he was tied in any way. Cary Grant, the man Archie had become, acted in much the same way. When he wasn't married, he wanted to be. When he was married, he didn't want to be. Cary Grant and Betsy Drake married at Christmas in 1949, flown out to a private ceremony by Howard Hughes, who, as well as still recovering from a horrific plane crash, also acted as the best man. There were no guests, no bridesmaids, and no honeymoon. During the early 1950s, Cary felt out of step with the culture and cinema. His only notable film of the time was entitled Monkey Business, an amusing satire on the American fixation and Cary's own desire to stay looking young, even when old. In 1954, he agreed to star in Alfred Hitchcock's To Catch a Thief, as it meant he could spend the summer months filming in the south of France. Aged 50, he formed a deep and lasting friendship with his co-star, Grace Kelly, and would mourn her loss deeply when she died behind the wheel of her car many years later. The film was a success and renewed Cary's faith in himself as an actor.
Look, John. Hold them. Diamonds. Have you ever had a better offer in your whole life? One with everything.
Betsy Grant, gaining more success as a writer than an actress, had completed a script called Houseboat, which she wanted to sell to a major studio. Cary, unbeknownst to her, took it upon himself to do just that, wanting to co-star in the picture with his wife. The studio took it on, but by making Cary sign a contract to say he had no right over which co-star they chose, even though they agreed that his wife would be starring in the film.
That guest house is too small. We'll be on top of each other. Now try to look at it from my viewpoint. Oh no, perhaps you better not.
In 1956, during the making of The Pride and the Passion, Cary Grant fell head over heels for his beautiful Italian co-star, Sophia Loren. They conducted a romantic relationship, even though he was married to Betsy, and Sophia was about to get married to the Italian producer, Carlo Ponti. Cary insisted that she be his co-star in Houseboat, the next film he was going to make, and the studio fell over themselves to agree. Sophia Loren was a much bigger draw to the cinema-going public than Betsy Grant. However, the relationship turned sour when Sophia refused to leave Carlo Ponti. Cary told the studio he now wanted Betsy back to star in Houseboat.
Cynthia does some cleaning and scrubbing, a little polishing here and there. It might be quite comfortable.
Who, I?
You shake up.
What's the matter? You scared?
Yes, I'm scared. Now go on.
Before the shooting started, and after, The Pride and the Passion had flopped disastrously at the box office. Cary made what was to be one of his most memorable films, An Affair to Remember, with Deborah Kerr. His success was spoilt considerably when he was told by the studio that they decided to bring Sophia Loren back as his co-star for Houseboat, citing the terms of his original contract. So Betsy was forced to see her own script, with a role intended for herself played out by her recent arch-rival for Carrie's affections. Carrie tried to resume his relationship with Sophia, but she rebuffed him. The romantic comedy on set was neither romantic or amusing. During this time, Carrie began experimenting with a drug called lysergic acid, or LSD for short. It had been used during the war as a truth drug, as its prime function seemed to be an unlocking of the subconscious mind, which would create an outpouring of memories and emotions. Psychiatrists and doctors would use it on patients under carefully controlled conditions. Betsy Grant had already cured Carrie of smoking using hypnotism, but he wanted LSD, or acid as it was popularly known, to cure him of his crippling self-doubt and bring out and banish his childhood memories. He was instrumental in introducing psychologist Timothy Leary to the drug. After being converted by Carrie, Leary became its official ambassador and misguided hero of millions of students during the 1960s.
He made a big mistake when he left you £2 million to play the fool with.
Believe it or not, Sir James, I'm paying you 20 guineas to give me medical advice, not a lecture.
After many separations and reconciliations, Betsy obtained a divorce from Cary Grant in August 1962. Yet again, mental cruelty was the grounds given. Was Carrie exacting revenge on women because of Elsie Leach, dominating them like she dominated him as a little boy? In the last few years of Carrie and Betsy's marriage, he was conducting affairs with many younger women. Yet, in the year of his divorce, he turned down the film Charade because it had him, a 58-year-old man, chasing a much younger woman. The script had been written especially for him, and he refused to make it until it was rewritten to make a joke of the age gap between himself and his young co-star, Audrey Hepburn. Cary Grant was always a man of contradictions when it came to the distinction between his public and private persona. He also turned down the film role of the British super spy James Bond, which went on to make Sean Connery a star and create an iconic cinema legend, citing his age again. However, it's rumoured that Ian Fleming, the writer of the James Bond books, based his character on a mixture of himself, Noel Coward and Cary Grant, each of them having done extensive spying for the British Secret Service during World War II. Cary Grant's main relationship during the early 60s was with a budding actress called Dyan Cannon. She gave up her career to be with Cary as he began to be demanding and controlling yet again, echoing the way his mother forced her views and choice of clothes on him as a little boy. He made sure his new wife would dress and look to his tastes. Dyan Cannon soon fell pregnant, and Cary was absolutely delighted. He married her in a chapel owned by Howard Hughes on July the 22nd, 1965, a few weeks after taking her to England to receive Elsie Leach's approval from her nursing home in Bristol. 1966, just over a month after his 62nd birthday, Cary Grant became the father to Jennifer Grant, his only child. He retired from acting to spend more time with his family. But the fussiest and most controlling side of Cary Grant's nature began to take over as he dedicated himself to Jennifer's well-being and safety. In fact, his daughter's arrival was bringing out the same traits in him that he disliked in his own mother. In August 1967, Dyan sued Cary Grant for divorce, and again it was on the grounds of cruelty. After the divorce, She became gregarious, outspoken and confident, constantly bad-mouthing her ex-husband in interviews, whilst Carrie turned inwards with the constant fear that he'd lose his daughter to a woman who he thought was now mentally unbalanced. Perhaps Carrie was scared of forceful and opinionated women, which was precisely what Diane Cannon had become. Maybe it reminded him again of his mother, and that fact that she'd been classed as mentally unbalanced by her husband. Eventually, the divorce was finalised. The concluding proceedings relayed to Carrie in a hospital bed after a nasty car accident had incapacitated him. In 1970, the year he received an honorary Oscar for his unique mastery of screen acting with the respect and affection of his colleagues, he'd also begun working as a vital member for the board of Fabergé, the giant and powerful cosmetics empire. He received a nominal salary of $25,000 a year, but it was the perks of the job that attracted him most. Using the company private jet, he could fly back and forth from engagements to see Jennifer, his daughter, as often as possible. The 1970s brought much bereavement for Carrie, which would affect him in many different ways. The first was in July 1972. Lance Reventlow died in a plane crash, and it was like losing a precious son, as Carrie had continued to be supportive of Lance long after his divorce from Lance's wealthy mother, Barbara Hutton. This was followed in January 1973, just after Carrie's 69th birthday, by the death of Elsie Leach. He appeared unaffected in his public dealings with the funeral arrangements. William McIntosh, a close friend and business associate, commented on the lack of rapport between mother and son. However, perhaps Cary Grant just reverted back to being Archie Leach in her presence, unable to assert himself, allowing her a control over him that she never really had. She was justly proud of her son, but incapacitated by years of being institutionalised, which was her reason for turning down his many invitations to live with him in the USA. The two of them obviously formed some sort of lasting bond when she was released from the asylum, or there would have been no real reason for Carrie's constant visits to England to see her. The love he felt for his father was unflinching, even though his behaviour had been at times appalling, both negligent and willfully damaging. Cary seemed to forgive his father for his many indiscretions, but his mother was never allowed this courtesy of warm nostalgia, either in interviews for the press or conversations with friends. Perhaps because she wasn't his birth mother after all, or possibly because she refused to acknowledge the existence of Cary Grant and always saw straight through to the ever-hidden Archie Leach.
What have you two been talking about?
Oddly, the death of his mother seemed to bring about a change in Cary. He became less troubled and more at peace with himself, indicating that he was finally free to let go of Archie Leach and become who he wanted to be, Cary Grant. In 1976, Cary's half-brother Eric Leach died of cancer. Just a footnote in his family history as far as Cary was concerned. He blamed Eric for keeping the secret of his mother's incarceration from him, and he didn't attend the funeral. It was also the year that Howard Hughes died. Cary had been the only friend allowed to see him on infrequent visits during his later years as a virtual recluse. 1979 saw the death of Barbara Hutton, which was another merciful release for Cary. She'd been wasting away for years, and had become disturbed by everything and everyone around her, often calling Carrie in the middle of the night and shouting down the phone at him about people trying to poison or kill her.
Now look here, you... She hung up. What did I say?
In 1980, the comedian Chevy Chase made an ill-advised joke about Cary Grant being a homosexual on a popular NBC chat show, which enraged the general public, upset friends that knew him, and hurt Cary badly. He was fed up with not being able to defend himself against such accusations and began a $10 million lawsuit, which he later withdrew after careful consideration. The truth was more complicated, as he'd had close relationships with men and women. A maitre d' at the Beverly Hillcrest Hotel remembers that during the 1970s, Cary and Randolph Scott would often meet up for an evening meal in a darkened corner of the restaurant. They always appeared deep in conversation, and only ever interested in each other. In a BBC documentary, Randolph Scott's son states categorically that there was no homosexual relationship between the two. He claims that his father's doctor has medical records that prove that there's no telltale evidence of any physical activity. Perhaps Cary's need for male companionship stemmed from the fact that his mother's suffocation of him as a child gave him an odd attitude towards women. Because she controlled him, he wanted to control them. With men, he could be open and honest, and there was no hidden agenda. Finally, Cary discovered a relationship that worked for him, as he realised how to actually be himself in this late stage of his existence. Barbara Harris was a 28-year-old public relations officer at the Royal Lancaster Hotel, West London, in England. She'd assisted 75-year-old Cary in a Fabergé trade show there, and he pursued her with relentless enthusiasm. She finally relented, and in 1980 moved across to America to be with him. His daughter Jennifer was overjoyed that he'd finally found someone that truly made him happy, and gave her approval instantly when asked. A year later, on April the 15th, 1981, Barbara Harris became the final Mrs. Grant. In 1983, he began opening up to the public for the first time, carefully eased into it at the insistence of his wife. He toured with a one-man show entitled A Conversation with Cary Grant. A slight stroke hindered him briefly in October 1984, and he was told to ease up on the constant travelling, the work for Fabergé, the personal appearances, gala dinners, and celebratory functions.
Mind putting your shot somewhere else?
Cary, still looking in good shape and feeling fit, decided against it, and continued with a diary crammed full of everything he was warned against. Arriving for one of his Conversation With shows at Davenport, Iowa, he felt dizzy and unwell, but refused to rest. If he hadn't been so stubborn at this point, it may have saved his life. A local doctor, Dwayne Manlove, somewhat of an unfortunate name regarding Cary's alleged bisexuality, was eventually called, against Cary's wishes, and he was told he was suffering a severe stroke. But Cary still refused to go anywhere for treatment. Eventually, an ambulance was summoned, and Cary squeezed his wife's hand lovingly and told her not to worry. Mercifully, his confused state of mind was making him less aware of the seriousness of it all. Cary Grant died at 11:22 p.m. on Saturday the 26th of November, 1986. He'd said he'd hated the thought of being buried, particularly alongside a host of other famous names, so perhaps to ensure top billing even in death, he was cremated. "Who is Cary Grant?" he was once asked. "When you find out, tell me. was his reply. Cary Grant was, and is, quite simply, a legend. His film career eclipsed his troubled personal life, and he died doing what he did best, entertaining and enthralling the public. When you look at the back streets of Bristol, where Cary Grant grew up, it's hard to grasp the enormity of the leap he made to Hollywood stardom. Even for would-be film stars of the 21st century, this is proof positive that chasing a dream can be worthwhile. The story of Cary Grant is, of course, not without its cautionary warnings. Success, fame, public adoration and fortune did not bring him happiness, and life in the Hollywood goldfish bowl made exorcising his own private demons very difficult indeed. However, look to the wonderful film legacy that Cary Grant has left behind, and what you'll see is a survivor who consistently thrills and entertains, and will continue to do so for as long as the films are available to the viewing public. What's more, Cary Grant carried off every performance with glamour, elegance and style, with an ironic comic touch that's never been bettered. The golden age of the matinee idol may have had its day, but the memory will live on thanks to the timeless movie presence of Cary Grant, combined with the drive and determination of Archibald Alec Leach.
It is.
What's on the other side?
It's another new one.
You mind playing it for me?